Let's see here. Hey, YouTube. YouTube is live. All right. I don't know about. Okay, LinkedIn is live too. You ready?
Let's go.
All right. Hey, LinkedIn. All right. We are officially live. Hello. Welcome to anyone that has joined us either on LinkedIn, on YouTube, or TikTok. Excited to
Come
have y'all
on.
here. My name is Adrielle, for those of you that I have not yet met, and I am here joined by Caren Young, aka the professional adult. I need to mute some things because I can hear myself talking to myself instead of just you, which is really frustrating. But we are here today to have one of our usual conversations. This is something we do pretty frequently. If you're not familiar, we're almost always on YouTube having conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. For some time, I have hosted DEI in 5. I'm coming up on almost 40 episodes, which is amazing. I honestly am shocked that I have made it this far myself in trying to juggle other things, but here we are. So, huge accomplishment, and Caren has been so pivotal in that. So, thank you for being here, for being a part of it.
I'm
Um,
also part of the reason it's never a DEI in five. Yeah,
yeah,
I'm
well,
the reason
you
it's
know, we're
DEI
long
in third
winded.
five.
We're long winded. It is what it is. But so today we wanted to talk about, for lack of better words, keyboard warriors and authentic advocates. Something that we've noticed is that there have been some pretty significant challenges lately in terms of navigating DEI conversations. There seems to be almost like this clash between what we're referring to as keyboard warriors, which I'll define in a moment, and authentic advocates, particularly on the interwebs. So we thought it would be useful to just host a discussion around that. We invite anybody who's on the live to add comments, ask questions, etc. We are all ears, eyes, etc. Before we get in, I think it's always important just to kind of level set on a few things. Obviously, it's just Caren and I talking today. This isn't like an open forum, but we still think it's important that people respect the space. So if you are engaging, asking questions, adding anecdotes, sharing comments, etc., please be mindful of your language. Please also just keep an open mind and understand that we're all approaching this from different perspectives, from different experiences, etc. So, with that, really quickly, we're talking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. Really basic definitions today. When I think about diversity, and I think Caren and I like to use roughly the same definitions. But when I think about diversity, I'm simply thinking about the presence and the mix of differences. So I know people often hear diversity or even DEI collectively and just default to thinking about race or ethnicity or gender and sexuality. It's so much more than that. It's beyond what we can even just look at a person and think we can assess about them. So while I could look at you and perhaps maybe guess your age, your race, ethnicity, there are all these other things about your identity that I can't necessarily look at you and determine. I don't know your socioeconomic status. I don't know what languages you speak. I don't know your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, etc. So again, diversity is our mix of presence or mix of differences. Equity is the second term, and that's really about promoting fairness, justice, impartiality. So, not to be confused with equality. I like to kind of differentiate the two by saying that equality is sort of like the one size fits all t shirt. It doesn't matter if you are skinny, average size, fat, short, tall, you're getting a one size fits all t shirt and you're going to have to make it work. In contrast, when we're talking about equity, it requires me to look at you as an individual and I'm going to say, oh, you need a smaller shirt, you need a larger shirt, one that's going to actually be comfortable for you, right? You're getting the same thing, a t shirt, but it actually fits your body. So that's how I compare equity and equality. And then finally, inclusion, I believe, is an outcome. So inclusion happens when all of us that are part of this collective diverse mix come together and we actually feel as though we have some sense of equity. Some people like to mix in belonging. I don't know. There have been a lot of discussions on whether or not you want to feel as if you belong, especially as it relates to the workplace. But we'll hold that conversation for another time. Inclusion is an outcome in my mind. So those are the definitions we're working with today. Um, And so back to our discussion today, which is really on navigating these DEI conversations, and thinking about how we're navigating them both online, in real life, in this hybrid world. Um, I think, we really wanted to focus on the fact that there is a lot of resistance right now. There's a lot of discomfort when it comes to DEI. There is certainly a rise of what we have been referring to as keyboard warriors, who are often misusing DEI language. And so when I think about keyboard warriors, I'm thinking about people who are often a little aggressive, maybe confrontational, especially online, hiding behind their screens. So there's some level of anonymity there. They're not showing their faces, not disclosing their names, often misusing and misunderstanding DEI language and spreading misinformation based on what they think it is and what they think it means. And are often, I think, Caren, one thing you added was that our sort of keyboard warriors often are asking questions and not doing so in good faith. They're just trying to troll and gaslight and poke the bear. In contrast, when we think about authentic advocates, we're really thinking about individuals who are genuinely supporting and actively promoting diversity, equity, inclusion, who really understand the terms and seek to have productive dialogues. You're not necessarily seeking to come to a consensus with everybody else, but you are able to respectfully agree to disagree. So, psychological safety 101. I think of, authentic advocates as people who are taking it upon themselves to be educated, who are self-reflecting and doing the work, who are addressing any misinformation that they see, who are, I'm tired of using the word ally, but I'll use ally, who are allies, and using their power and privilege and position within the social identity world to perhaps influence and foster positive change. Anything to add? I know that was a long-winded intro, but I wanted to set us up today.
No. I think that that's a great intro, and I think that's a great way of setting all of that up. I think the biggest thing for me, and I will not get on my high horse about it this time, I promise. But I will say again, if you are doing a good job of D, E, and I, you don't need the other letters. But again, I'm not gonna get on my high horse. I'm just gonna say just that. Um,
Yeah.
I also will say, as we have our conversations today, especially about keyboard warriors and especially about um, those who are not necessarily approaching the conversations in good faith, I would
Mm-hmm.
challenge anyone who is having a moment or having a ping within themselves to sit and examine that and to examine why they're having that ping and why that is itching them a little bit and see kind of where that's coming from.
Definitely. Definitely. So, jumping into kind of, I guess you could call it the meat of our discussion today, what are some of the issues that you've been seeing, Caren, online in terms of the keyboard warriors and the struggle to get authentic advocacy out there for DEI?
So I think the biggest thing that I have seen is the weaponization of language. Um, that's been the biggest thing is folks who are keen to use terms like allyship, terms like even terms like privilege or oppression or something is a traumatic event, and language that has very specific meanings and has very specific purposes, but are being used instead to obfuscate and to almost kind of bludgeon folks into behaving a certain way. A good example of that is the conversation I see around diversity versus diversity of thought. Um, I believe that diversity of thought is a really great way of pushing actual diversity to the side.
Yes.
Because, of course, we all have diversity of thought. That doesn't change anything about creating a structure and a system that is truly more equitable for everybody. I mean, for me, diversity of thought is the same level of diversity as names. Like, hey, we're not just gonna have Karens with K's, we're gonna have Karens with C's also. That's a diversity of names. And
Sure.
but for people to come and use that, especially when they are higher on the ladder of privilege, for folks to come in and to use that as a bludgeon and say, well, you're not talking about diversity of thought. Well, I guess you're really not here for diversity now, are you?
Right.
So yeah, so I think for me the biggest thing is the weaponization of DEI terminology.
Yep. I think we're seeing a lot of what happened with the word woke happen to
Mhm.
DEI, which is really frustrating. I think as soon as the Stop Woke Act came from our good friend Rob DeSantis, who refers to woke or stop woke as stop wrongs to our kids and employees. Um, I think it just started to, I know that face. I think it just started to just shift and set the tone for how people are perceiving DEI. Like I've seen DEI people put like dead end initiatives or something like that. And there are a lot of dead end initiatives when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion. Let's keep it real, right? Like there absolutely are, but that does not define everything that is DEI. And I think it's just so unfortunate, especially for those of us that have been doing this work for some time. And, there are people that have been doing this work for far longer than you and I have been doing it. And
Yeah.
to discredit the efforts that they've made, it really bothers me a lot. And I think, one of the hardest things for me is reminding myself that I can't convince everyone or change everyone's mind or even get people to be receptive to understanding what DEI really means and what it entails. And I think we talk about this quite a bit of, we're not here to expend our energy on trying to convert naysayers and trolls and keyboard warriors. I'm not, at least. I can't speak for everyone else. And I know you share a similar sentiment.
Mhm.
But it's hard sometimes because you're just like, I just want to grab this person and shake them and be like, why don't you understand what we're trying to do? Right? Like it's really, really frustrating at times. Um, so I definitely hear you on the weaponization piece. Anything else that's like stood out to you?
Yes, and here's where we start to get controversial. I know
Go
after
for it.
that. The other side of that coin is also what I'm seeing too. People who have become so hypersensitive about DEI issues that
Mm-hmm.
they are making mountains out of anthills
Mm-hmm.
and saying, well, oh, well, you can't use this term and you can't use this and you can't use that. But the group that's actually affected is like, well, like I think a really great example is the Latinx Latine conversation
Sure.
and how folks who were non-Latine spent so much time talking over those who were,
Mm-hmm.
saying what term was appropriate and what term wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
instead of listening to the actual group itself.
Sounds like
Um,
BIPOC.
I, I'm definitely not getting on my high horse about BIPOC, but yes, but yes, um, but instead of listening to the actual members of the group,
Yeah.
other folks who want so very hard to prove and show their allyship or prove or show their co-conspiratorship end
Mm-hmm.
up talking over the actual groups affected, and instead of listening to them, they're kind of deciding what they want instead. And so I think that that's the other side of the coin that I'm seeing quite a bit.
Yeah. With that, it just made me think about how we spend, and historically I've seen this happen, we spend so much time talking about the language and the words we're using and the terms that it poses such a major distraction, to me at least, from the real problems and issues at hand. I'll never forget in one of my first like full-time DEI roles, we spent months going back and forth on, are we calling it DEI? Are we calling it IND? Is it idea? Is it DENINB? And I was like, quite frankly, I forgot I'm on LinkedIn. I don't care what you what you call it. Let's just do the work at the end of the day. And to be fair, I recognize and I know that language matters. It absolutely does. But I also recognize and know that language changes. And it is very hard for people to process and embrace change, especially when it comes to DE and I. And so that's one of the things I've noticed lately is it just feels like it's just another distraction from the actual problems, the actual issues at hand, which I find very frustrating. Another
But
thing, yeah, no, go for it.
it's super easy to spend your time swirling on a name or swirling on a term, and
Yes,
that way you look like you're doing work when in fact you're not doing anything at all.
yes,
But
just
if you
shuffling
spend all of your
papers.
time swirling or spend all your time talking about a communication plan or spend all your time about how you're going to put together a committee or how what you're going to
Mm-hmm.
call it or who's going to, you're not doing any work. but you
Right.
look like you're doing something, and then by the time it's done, you either just kind of hope it all blows over, or someone actually finally stands up like you would or like I would and go,
Mm-hmm.
you can call it a dingle hopper, I don't care, can we just get the work done, please?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think it goes back again to what we kind of defined early on is like a lot of this is a result of discomfort. It's a result of resistance. It's a result of fear. And so it's much easier to keep kind of walking in circles talking about what should we call it? How should we structure this thing to keep sort of remaining in the design phase rather than the implementation phase, which actually gets things going and you can actually start to iterate and see what works and analyze your approaches. And so I hope we see people push past that a little bit more. um, Other things you're seeing that you want to call out?
Those are the two main things that I'm seeing. I mean, I am also seeing kind of as I guess kind of a corollary to the second. I
Yeah.
am still seeing a lot of sea lioning and a lot of kind of whataboutism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm also seeing a lot of folks who are just plain giving up and saying, okay, well, I guess this just isn't working. So we should just cut everything. We should just cut all the programs.
Yeah.
Um, I was reading a Fast Company article earlier today about why so many organizations are pulling back from DEI initiatives,
Mm-hmm.
and really just the thrust of the article was that folks just kind of given up. They're just
Yeah.
like, this is too hard to do. I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I hear you. It's hard. I mean, I think we both definitely have our days when we're like, why are we still here? Why are we doing this? It feels like I'm standing at a wall and just talking to it, and no one is hearing me, which is really frustrating. So I definitely hear you on that. There was something else I wanted to bring up, but it escapes me. I have not had enough coffee today. Maybe it'll come back to me in a little bit. Um, but there's something else that I've been seeing a lot of. I'm still saying, oh, one thing I'm seeing, and I think you kind of hinted at this, is like the oppression Olympics. Um, it's hard. And it's hard for me, especially to sort of, and I never feel like I should have to do this, but sometimes I feel like I have to separate my identity as a black woman from who I am as a ideally an objective DEI practitioner. Because the inner me is always like, why are we going through oppression Olympics when pretty much everything we're talking about in DEI has been rooted in this idea of anti-blackness and oppression. That was kind of the starting point for all of it. So many black movements, civil rights movements have paved the way for all other marginalized identities to do something, to say something, to stand up to whatever it is. Um, and so it's really hard sometimes for me to like not just want to scream about it because I know doing so often causes people to shut down. And that's one of the approaches I think we wanted to talk about today in terms of navigating this gray area where you're constantly like facing these keyboard warriors and trying to bridge the gap with authentic advocates is like being able to facilitate these conversations in a way that keeps people open. I think that is the biggest challenge. For me, I'm like, I don't care if y'all argue, if you have opposing points of view, that's cool, but stay here. Let's keep talking about it. And I think that's one of the hardest things, especially if you are supposed to be kind of a neutral party in these situations, like us, as we often are as DEI folks, but then we still have our own individual identities. And I can't, again, as much as I want to, I can't separate me and my experiences as a black woman from being that neutral third party. So I don't know. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think as long as everybody, us included, walk into every space with the heart of I am here to learn and to share, and to realize that everyone is a culmination of their experiences. And because everyone is a culmination of their experiences, the things that we do kind of shape and make who we are. And so while I might not agree with you, while I might vehemently not agree with you, I know that you got here because of your experiences that led you here. So there's something that perhaps I can even still learn. And hopefully there's something you can learn from me based on the culmination of my experiences. So I think if you come in like with that heart to start, then that is a way of being able to sit and to stay in the discomfort. And I think that it's also, and I know I say this at all of like my workshops and trainings when I start,
Mm-hmm.
is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yep.
There is going to be at least one thing in this session that's going to make you feel a kind of way. That's fine. It is okay. Even if you walk out and you're like, screw her, I don't want to have anything to do with her, this was
Right.
stupid, everything, still just sit with it for a second.
Yep.
So yeah.
I love that. And I think that's when I think about the workspace in general, I think that ability to slow down and reflect has been forgotten or was never even considered in a lot of ways. As it relates to DEI, but I think even more broadly as it relates to leadership as well and management and how we interact with each other, even if you're an individual contributor, like what are our interactions like amongst our teams? Have I actually, if I react in a way to something, or if you say or do something that makes me feel a type of way, it's easy and it's human nature to have a snap reaction to it and to want to say something immediately. But it takes work to be intentional and to actually stop yourself and be like, hold on, what am I feeling? Is it in my body? Because a lot of it can be physical. Your shoulders might get tense, your pupils might dilate. These are very scientific things that just naturally happen to humans. I was just telling someone earlier about one of my favorite books, DEI books, that people don't even associate as a DEI book, which is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. And it's such an important read because it will help you better understand how and why we react the way we do to just about everything, right? On average, we process like a million bits of information every second. So, like, every second right now, my brain is like 11 mil, like every piece of color, everything that is around me right now, I'm processing, right? But consciously, you only process about 40 to 50 bits of information every second. So that's like a fraction. Although some scientists have argued like it's up to 120 or something bits, but that's again out of a million pieces of information, that's not a lot for your conscious brain. But you can actually like program yourself to actually to be more conscious about certain things, right? Like as I'm sitting here talking to you, I'm blinking, I'm breathing, but I'm not consciously like inhale, exhale, blink, right? But if I wanted to, right? If I wanted to be mindful and intentional, I could sit here and control my breathing. I could sit here and monitor my blinking, right? Similarly, how we react to people in a workspace, in life, in society, I can actually pause and be like, wait a minute, let me catch myself. Or if you say something that I find abrasive or offensive, I can be like, okay, hold on. How do I feel? What am I feeling physically, mentally, emotionally? Why do I feel like this? Is it something that's tied to a past experience that I had in the workplace or in life, in childhood, even? 9 times out of 10, if you slow down and actually think about that, you'll identify some of those reasons why you are reacting or wanting to react in that way. And so that is what we mean by, and now we're getting into the scientific parts of it, but that's what we mean by sitting with the discomfort and actually like figuring it out. Why do I feel like this? Why do I react like this? Why do I think like this? Um, yeah, I know I just went on a rant, but it's one of my favorite topics is
No,
like
not at all. I
the
think it
human
actually
response.
ties back really nicely into the conversation about being a keyboard warrior or an authentic ally.
Yeah.
Um, because again, if you're someone who is trying to get off that hot take, or you're someone who sees a post, and I see this on LinkedIn all the
Mhm.
time, which is
Mhm.
why I'm happy to be the lurker, as you are the poster, I am the lurker.
Yeah.
But I see it all the time where someone will post something and then someone out of nowhere immediately pops in with this hot take, and it's clear they didn't read the full post.
Mhm.
And it's clear
Mhm.
like they didn't read everything and kind of sit and understand what that person was actually saying. They just saw a buzzword or they saw something that triggered them, triggering the word triggered also being another thing that gets people riled
Oh
up.
yeah, we love the word
Um,
triggered.
like they saw that and immediately they were like, I gotta hop in and say something. I gotta put in my opinion, as
Yeah.
opposed to just sitting with it and going, well, why did I feel the need to do that? And
Yeah.
so kind of even in making that shift, can you tell I'm a product manager? Even in making that
Come on,
shift
product manager.
from being someone who is trying to give a hot take all the time to someone who is truly moving into true co-conspiratorship and allyship, one of the
Right.
things that we would always recommend is just take that second, take that extra beat to sit in it and to sit into why you were doing this and to sit into why you feel the need to crank out the Twitter fingers, to crank out the YouTube fingers, to crank out those things so quickly.
Right.
Why do you feel the need to hop in right away?
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting that you bring that up because I have to catch myself every now and then, especially because I read so many articles and like research papers day to day on DEI. At this point, I should really like be in somebody's PhD program, but student loans. But my point is, sometimes stop. Someone else made that face this week too. We're like, you should be on that. But sometimes I catch myself and I'm like, wait a minute, I need to read the full article. You have to keep in mind, like articles, the titles, the leads of articles are designed to often be clickbaity, especially now because at the end of the day, journalists, media outlets, they have to drive traffic to have people actually read, to get their advertisers paid, et cetera, et cetera. So I have to sometimes catch myself if I see something and I'm like, ooh, I want to share this. I'm like, wait, let me actually read this. Or at least I have a little plugin on my browser, like get the browser to read it to me so that I actually know what's going on. But, there's so much information out there now. I think we're just so inclined to try to react as quickly as possible, to be the first person to share it. I want to be on top of it. I want to be a leader in this space. And so I definitely understand that. But again, coming back to being intentional, you have to slow down, actually think about what you're sharing out in the world, actually think about, is this valid? Is it true what I'm sharing before you actually put it out there? Um, it's tough. It's definitely tough.
I think, and I think about this kind of the way I used to think about product. I
Mm-hmm.
know, shocking. That before you necessarily go to market, in this case, typing out whatever you're going to type out, have you done any validation? Do you know who your audience is? Do you know why you're doing this? What are you
Right.
trying to get out of it? What's the metric you're trying to get out of it? And for a lot of y'all, the metric is just that little hit of dopamine you get out of that. Yeah, really, is that really what you want out of that, or,
Yeah.
or do you want to truly have a conversation?
Right.
And again, it kind of goes back to the idea of asking things in good faith,
Mm-hmm.
just doing things to rile folks up,
Right.
doing things to trigger other folks. What is your true intent? What is the true metric you're looking for? If it is really that hint of dopamine, please
Right.
go find it somewhere else.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Please.
And I think that's tied to like some of the qualities and characteristics of somebody being an authentic advocate and somebody who's truly dedicated to this space. The idea isn't that you become an expert on diversity, equity, inclusion, but the idea is that you are open minded, that you are seeking opportunity where you can have positive influence, right? So, again, and that ties into the education piece of like, am I educating myself? Am I slowing down to actually learn and understand what this is before I share it out and try to teach somebody else about it, right? That is one thing that grinds my gears so much, especially in the DEI space. Like, people will put something out and they'll share it, and I'm like, okay, let's have a conversation. And they can't fully articulate or have a conversation around it because they haven't fully looked into it or studied it or researched it. And I'm like, I'm the first to be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain this to me? Like, I need other people to like constantly be teaching me. And the learning never stops. Like, we do this work day in and out, and like, there's still stuff every day where I'm like, oh, that's the thing. Okay, cool. Let me catalog that, or I need to bookmark this thing. But I think it's so important to educate yourself in order to have a positive influence. Know what you're talking about, understand whatever research, document, article you're sharing before you share it out with other people. I think it's also important to display personal growth. So, sharing your journey with others, and know that I think there's so much to be said and to be learned from people sharing authentic journeys. I think we're so conditioned to share the good, the positive, everything, the rainbow sprinkles and sunshine, but when things aren't going well, we kind of retreat. We don't share that with people. We don't talk about it. And it's hard. Like, it's the level of vulnerability that takes time to develop, but I've seen how it influences and impacts DEI discussions when people can be honest, when they can share their real, um, experiences with other people, and that helps other people start to build empathy over time. Other things, I mean, building connections as much as you can. So that's part of like that positive influence. And then I think whenever possible, advocating for others, empowering others. Um, I get allyship. I keep trying to get away from saying allyship just because early on you were talking about like the misuse of words. And I feel like allyship and being an ally is one of those terms that people have unfortunately abused and misused a little too much for me, for my liking. So
Yes, in my grouchier moments, I keep threatening to make an actual like patch, like a Girl Scout patch that says ally or good guy badge. In my grouchier moments, but you know, but
Baldy
I
Einstein.
yeah. Oh no, the Baldy Einstein stuff is in the works. It's in the works. So
Yes.
a little bit of background.
Oh
We did
yeah.
a previous DEI in five, and one of the YouTube comments that was kind of slagging us off was talking about called me Baldy Einstein,
Mm-hmm.
and it was absolutely in a derogatory way. And I was like, that's brilliant, and I'm taking it. And congratulations, it's going to be merch. I love this for
Yeah.
me.
To be
Um,
clear, it was not a comment. It was an email that I received. So
oh,
these
that's
are
right.
this
That's
kind of
right. It
led
was.
us to this conversation today, this keyboard warrior. Because
That's
if
right. It
y'all
was an
have seen
email.
some of my inbox and the comments on my YouTube, it is vile. But I'm still here, and I'm gonna
Right. Which
continue here
which
with
again,
Baldy
Adriel,
Einstein.
which is why I give you so much props and praise for continuing to do this. Like I no. No. No.
it's
Just
it's
no.
hard. I've learned a lot of restraint. YouTube has taught me a lot of restraint because I tell you, like, there are some days I'm like, I think I'm gonna forget that I am still a professional because the comments are one thing, but when people email you, and again, keyboard warriors, they're hiding behind a screen. There's no face. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm happy for you to have a completely different perspective or opinion. Let's have a conversation about it. Like,
Yeah.
but if you're hiding, how is that possible? I don't
Exactly.
know.
Exactly. Well, I want to also go back to something you said earlier, and actually something you did earlier, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
another thing to be really mindful in how to make that transition from popping off to kind of thinking through, and that is setting a base level, setting kind of a ground level.
Yeah.
Like at the beginning of this conversation, you said, "What exactly are we talking about? What do these words mean in the context of today's conversation? Here's what we're talking about." And
Mm-hmm.
I think that that does a really great job in making sure that we're saying the same thing. Like, if you're just going to kind of talk to someone about the concept of being woke, by the way, which started in the 1920s, by the way, like that term came out like a long, long time ago. I'm sorry, not the 20s, it was the 60s because it came out of the early part of the Vietnam War. Sorry, not the 20s. That if we're talking about it and then you have someone who is like you have like Governor DeSantis talking about it, we're talking about two wildly different things.
Right.
But if you set the ground rules, it's like, okay, cool, we could talk about that. And then if somebody comes in and isn't asking in good faith, you can then go back and say, your premise isn't correct. We're not
Mm-hmm.
talking about the same thing. So of course
Mm-hmm.
your output's going to be different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, one of the biggest issues that I come across when I first like encounter clients and I'm just kind of like listening and trying to get a sense of what's going on. A lot of times, the very first thing I notice is that they are all in the same organization using wildly different definitions and have wildly different understandings and perceptions of not just the DEI terms themselves, but words that are associated like woke and all these other different concepts. Even allyship, people get confused. And so I think it's really important to always level set. Even, I know for some people it feels repetitive whenever you're having discussions. For those of you that are facilitators, like I do not start any kind of conversation without level setting. Even if I'm doing a webinar and I know people aren't joining me on the conversation, I still like to say, hey, I want this to be a safe space. I want, even if the comments are turned on, please be respectful, be mindful, be open minded. I always say I'm convinced the person next to you is always smarter at something than you are. So there's always opportunity to learn. Like, you're always going to know more about something than I do, and vice versa. And so there's always something I could take away from that. And so I think it's just important to always try to ensure that people are aligned, because then we can actually have productive discourse around whatever the topic is, and we're not getting into these like unnecessary conflicts because of differing language or understanding. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I don't actually have anything to add, which
Oh,
is rare for me.
I'll drop the mic. Um, so I know we're coming up on like our last 20 minutes or so, and if anyone has questions here, we are more than happy to take them. But I thought it would be nice to just kind of close out today with just thinking about some different approaches, strategies, if you will, tips and tricks for helping us just try to bridge the gap, and perhaps not even bridge the gap. Maybe we just leave the keyboard warriors where they are and we just keep leaning into authentic advocacy. But what does that even mean? Like, how do you continue to foster these conversations and create a, I always come back to it, psychologically safe space where people can be open to the discomfort, where they can be open to, potential resistance as well? Because I know it's easy, especially if you are um, an active advocate, to kind of close down when you are faced with a resistor, or to not want to engage. But, for me, I'm like, if somebody's on the fence and they're giving a little pushback, you know, I might lean in a little bit. But, there are situations where you have leaders who are making decisions who are resistant, and you can't just be like, all right, whatever, I'm not going to interact with them. We have to do something at some point, unless we're replacing them, which from what I've seen typically isn't the course of action. Um, and I hate to see people in organizations trying to work around their leaders. It's torture almost. Like, you're doing all these other things that are in your control, but you don't have leadership support. You don't have the additional resources you need, and they're often there. The resources are often there. Leaders often can make the time, but choose not to. So, how do we actually push forward? How do we have these conversations? Um, I think first and foremost is psychological safety. Like, everything for me always comes back to that. Like, can I just sit here and talk to you without fear of repercussions, of retaliation, of embarrassment, of insert whatever negative outcome, right? Um, and I think that's so important. And to help you get there, you really have to kind of set expectations. You have to set boundaries with people. Understand what we're going to be tolerant of, what we're not going to be tolerant of, and of course, encourage some vulnerability as well. Anything to add on the psychological safety part? I know we did a lot of this work together when we were at Pivotal on psychological safety, so it's
Yeah,
hard for me to
absolutely.
often articulate because I'm like, it's so second nature at this point.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So I think in speaking with folks, especially in speaking with leadership, um, not only is it a safety thing, it is also a matter of kind of breaking down those defenses.
Hmm.
I know for me, most of my clients are tech companies and tech adjacent companies. And to be incredibly candid, I've worked with a lot of folks who aren't always told that what they're doing isn't the right thing.
Mm.
And so for them to have someone come in and for someone to look like this, to come in and tell them, you have a lot of work to do and you've got to get this work done, people can become very defensive very quickly.
Yeah.
And because they're very defensive very quickly, you have to start to kind of break through those defenses. And the way that you do that is kind of as you outlined, and that is to touch upon the humanity
Hmm.
and to realize and to help them realize that everyone wants to be seen and heard. And the true goal of all of your DEI work should be to make sure that everyone is seen and heard. Now, notice I didn't talk about a group, I didn't talk about an ethnicity. I said everyone wants to be seen and heard, and you as a leader should want to make sure that everyone is seen and heard. And by engaging with me and engaging with my organization or engaging with your DEI initiatives, that
Hmm.
is one way of doing it. And so I think that that's one way of kind of bridging that gap so you can start to have that conversation in good faith.
Yeah, I love that. I want to just add on because you just made me think of something that we talk about quite often, which is that people often will hear about DEI within their workplace and feel like, oh, I don't belong to that. Like, I'm not diverse. An individual cannot be diverse. When we
No.
talk about diversity, again, we are talking about our collective mix of differences. So that is our collective, our group mix of differences. So, and for a while now, the word diversity has been code for insert whatever term, usually black, or gay or LGBTQIA plus, that people don't want to say or that they're not comfortable saying. But that's not what we're talking about when we say DEI. That we're not singling out a specific race, ethnicity, sexuality, whatever dimension of diversity. We are talking about everyone. So everyone should be a part of these conversations. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. Like, you should never feel like, oh, it's not my place, or I shouldn't be here, or I don't belong here. Um, but of course, recognize as you come into these spaces and these conversations, be very aware of your level of power and privilege as it relates to others, because you don't want to come in and then suck up all of the air, especially if you don't belong to a marginalized identity or underrepresented identity within that space. Notice I said within that space because when we talk about power and privilege and underrepresentation, it is often based on context. So, Caren and I can be in a group of black women, and let's say that there is someone that uses a wheelchair to get around and has a physical disability. In that regard, they are underrepresented and marginalized in that context. But in another, they may not if they're in a different group. So, again, like, when we're talking about underrepresentation, people feeling left out, feeling different, othered, etc., there's context that we have to look at in all instances. So just wanted to call that out because I just hate when people are automatically shutting down DEI anything because they're like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. That's not me. That's not me.
Exactly, exactly. And it's like, oh, stop, stop, stop. But yeah, it's I never want to say that it is insurmountable because it's absolutely not. It really and truly isn't. Um, I just think that it really requires us to really kind of focus again on the humanity of it, which I know is very weird to say as someone who is from from multiple marginalized communities.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but if you really want to have that connection, if you really want to make that shift over from that defensiveness, from that keyboard warrior, from that moment of I'm just going to pop off, I
Yeah.
think it really does require you to touch into the humanity of it.
Yep. Yep. And I think just a couple of other things that come to mind in terms of like handling these tough, difficult conversations. I think it's important that we're actually acknowledging the discomfort, and saying it out loud. Like, put some words around it. I think, I've sat in rooms and on calls with people, and you can just feel the like tenseness of people. Like, the elephant is in the room, right? And I'm like, let's just say it. Like, we're all thinking it, so someone say it. So you can be that someone. That calls it out, and not to say you need to have any answers or solutions for it, but hey, like, it feels like there's a little friction here, or hey, it seems like there's a little resistance. Can we try to unpack that, understand why that is, right? And hear people out. It's hard. It's really, really hard when you are trying to have conversations with people who are anti DEI, anti black, anti whatever in some way. It's really hard to actively listen, but from experience, it can get you really far just hearing out other perspectives. And you'll notice if you keep asking people questions, they'll start to unpack things themselves, and then they'll start to question themselves like, huh, I never really thought about that, or I never made this connection of why I have this belief, or why I behave this way towards this group or these individuals or towards this initiative. um, it's it's really interesting to witness. And I think, again, hard. And for people that belong to marginalized identities, I'm not here to tell you that you need to sit here and have patience or listen to these viewpoints. But if you are trying to create or bridge these gaps and push through these difficult conversations, that is one approach that does work. Of course, you can always think about like use of language, so making sure you're using inclusive language that allows everyone to feel as though they belong and they're welcomed. Encouraging people to participate, so not just leaning on one or two people to talk, but making sure you're inviting other perspectives, especially DEI folks and folks that are facilitating discussions. Don't get caught up in like side convos and like, sometimes you'll have your like one or two people that are really driving an area like, yeah, I got people engaged. But what about the other folks that are sitting there silent? Or if you're on Zoom, the people that have turned off their camera and haven't checked in or haven't responded to your questions if you're asking them. Always check in with those people. Try to keep pulling them back in. What else? Sharing personal experiences. We touched on that earlier. So any sort of personal stories or anecdotes that you're comfortable sharing that you think are going to be relatable or impactful in some way can always help open up the conversation and get people involved. And make sure, I think the last thing I'll add, and Caren, feel free to add more, is to make sure that it's not like a one and done conversation. I think there always needs to be follow up, check ins. And I think that's easy to forget because there's so much going on in our world. So, like, by next week, you might not even remember this conversation that we're having right now. But hopefully, we'll drop a nudge or something that reminds you that this conversation happens and you can have that ongoing either dialogue or just even thinking about it. To me, that matters. If it's top of mind, even for a few seconds every week, that's better than nothing. So,
Absolutely. So a few things. One, um, experiences and systems. That again, we're all a culmination of our experiences. So when someone from a marginalized community says something has happened to them, that is their experience. When someone from a non-marginalized community says, well, that's also their experience. But the
yeah.
goal is you got to listen to everybody's experience and you have to validate everyone's experience as their experience. Um, but then for folks who are kind of struggling to make that connection, I think it again goes back to making those connections for folks. Like one of the things I like to do, especially in my kind of 101 sessions, which by the way, tired. But one of the things I like to talk about in my 101 sessions is, we all have varying levels of privilege and the intersectionality of privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And so while I am a queer Black woman, I also have family privilege, educational privilege, class privilege. I have all of these other things, which will still put me in places and spaces that a lot of people who may not have those privileges don't have access to. So that kind of changes the way that I see the world, just like it
Yeah.
changes the way you see the world.
Yeah.
But I say that as a way of opening the door and bringing other people in. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, kind of going back before the second you started talking about the kind of big lovers of uh, privilege and intersectionality, folks kind of get, again, defensive and they pull back and it's like, well, I such and such and such and such. And so yeah, no. And it's like, but
Yeah.
if you kind of intersection all those things together, it's like, well, sure, you might be a white man from Omaha, Nebraska. Shout out to Omaha. But you may have grown up on a farm and may still be lower to middle class. So there are going to be places and spaces where I am more accepted than you are. Great. But that also doesn't change the fact I can still walk around Costco and someone's still trying to check out my groceries in the self checkout.
Yep.
So that's just again, and by doing that, you validate experiences and you talk about the systems in place of why we are where we are and the systems in place that we need to change to actually create a more equitable workforce and a more equitable society. So I think if we talk about things again in as opposed to experiences and systems, that's
Mm-hmm.
also another great way of doing that too. And I feel like I went a little bit on a rant, but
No, I think no, that's usually how our conversations go. I feel like was it you that I was talking to about this recently? Where I've said this a few times, but I'm just at the point now where I'm just so tired of people screaming like things like, "Oh, I'm not sexist" or "I'm not racist," and I personally, this is just my personal opinion, I don't care is how I feel right now. What I do care about is how we are thinking about what you were just talking about, the systems and the processes that are in place. Systemic racism, systemic sexism, those are the things, all the isms, those are the things that are allowing inequity to perpetuate. So it's so much more than your individual feelings and your resistance and your fear and discomfort and all that stuff. Like, we are talking about things that are deeply rooted in all domains of life, from how people have access to housing, to education, to food, to finances. I mean, I just picked up, I finally picked up, I forgot the name of it, but it talks about redlining, something color. I'll have to look it up, but um, you know what I'm talking about. It's
Yeah.
3 yards
Yeah,
away from my desk right
I
now.
was about to say, like, I have it on my bookcase already.
Yes, yes, but I finally picked that up because I was like, I need to know more about this, and I've never looked at it. Now I'm googling, but it just, my point is like, The Color of Law. Sorry, it's called The Color of
Yep.
Law, by Richard Rothstein. But I've been meaning to read it for some time, so that's going to be my reading coming up. But just all the things, like, it's beyond just our individual experiences and pain points. Like, we need to be looking at systems and processes and how they're affecting people. And I know I just named all these domains and industries, but you have to think about how this relates to your particular life, what you're doing, whether that's in society, out in the world, or at your job, which a lot of us are still spending a good chunk of our time in our professional lives, especially those of you that are joining us on LinkedIn today. So I think it's just really important to think beyond just yourself, especially if you are trying to be an advocate in this space, and know that there is so much for us to tackle on a systemic level.
Yeah.
So, any final thoughts? I haven't seen any questions come through. Y'all are quiet, but that's okay. We don't mind. You could also send us a DM, I guess. I
Yeah,
didn't say
send
that
us a
early
note.
on, but we
Send
don't
us
mind anonymous questions either.
exactly.
Um,
And as long as they're in good faith.
yeah.
Or and if they're not in good faith, at least enough to give me stuff for merch later on.
Yes, Baldy Einstein merch. I'm just jealous that I didn't get a fun nickname,
I mean,
but
I know it was like that was rude. That was real rude and disrespectful. Real rude and
oh
disrespectful.
my
Oh,
goodness. Just the amount of time it would take someone to type such a poorly written email and send it anonymously. It's just still beyond me, but here we are.
again, they wanted that hit of dopamine, and they wanted to be able to yell and gripe at someone, and they got what they wanted. I mean, and frankly, they did get what they wanted. We're still talking about them. We're still talking about that jerk right now. So they got what they wanted.
Yeah.
Um, but again, merch.
There you go. There you go. Well, it doesn't look like we have any questions. Hopefully, this was helpful to those of you that tuned in. I mean, I'm not going to lie, this was kind of just me and Caren catching up, which we do every week. And we figured we should just start giving people sort of a fly on the wall perspective of the conversations we have. Although sometimes they're a little bit more in the weeds. We had a agenda today, and I think
Yeah,
we did a pretty good job of sticking to it.
we
But
did.
yes, hopefully this was helpful for people. Please feel free to share it. If you have any follow up questions or thoughts, you can always message us directly. We're fine to pose them anonymously to the group. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, Caren. Anything to plug before we close out?
Yes, yes, yes. So I am finally, oh my God, finally, relaunching the professional adult. And the professional adult is now going to be two different verticals. One
Okay.
is diversity as a product. Diversity as a product is taking a lot of what I learned as a manager of product management and applying those principles of DEI to it. So it's a interesting and agile way of building DEI initiatives and doing so in an inclusive and iterative way. That is one vertical. The other vertical
Yes.
is manage in, which is helping to build inclusive managers. I didn't say leaders, I said managers. That my focus is on those who are moving from individual contributors into management. And so I will have two basic guides for both of those that I will be launching on my website and other platforms very soon. Each of them will be $5 a piece, but if you buy both of them together, it will be $7. Oh my God, a $3 savings.
Love it.
So that will be launching very, very soon. If you are interested, please let me know. I'll also give Adrielle the link to both of those so that we can have those on the site. But yeah, those are launching soon within like the next week or so. And then
Nice.
I will open up both of those programs, both as one on one consulting and also group work very, very soon. So the relaunch of TPA is coming through.
Love it. Love it. Let's see, what am I plugging? Well, first and foremost, Caren and I have two courses on Udemy, which we encourage you to check out, DEI 201 and also DEI Sourcing and Recruiting. So you can check those. They are some of the top ranked courses on Udemy, and now they're part of the business suite, which is pretty cool. We have like almost 1,500 students on our Udemy courses. Huge accomplishment. We should probably go in and start adding some more soon.
Probably.
But to be fair, Udemy takes a large chunk of our money, so we might be hosting them on other equity and pay Black women, please, and thank you. And of course, the Inclusive Leadership Journal. Encourage you to get it. It'll supplement all the good stuff that Caren is doing with DAP, which I will not be doing. I don't touch middle management. That is all Caren. So, but you can always supplement your work with the Inclusive Leadership Journal, which has a bunch of prompts to self-reflect, kind of like what we were talking about today, on why you behave, do, act, think like you are or do currently, and to really sort of reflect on your behaviors as a people leader so that you can foster more equity and inclusion amongst your teams. So that's what we got. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to follow us on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to our YouTubes. We both have them. I'll add some links. You can send us a carrier pigeon, an email, whatever you want. We like engaging with people. This is one of our favorite topics. So we would love to continue the discussion. Otherwise, we will see y'all back here soon, I'm sure. Next week, probably.
Probably.
All right. Thanks for joining us, y'all. Take care.